Welcome to the Shudder. I've got 3 Shudder-worthy stories for you, 2 Bigfoot encounters, and a strange happening that I think you'll find most interesting. If you have a story to tell, it doesn't have to be a sighting or encounter, just a strange happening that you'd like to share. I'd be happy to tell it here on the Shudder. My email is in the description. Okay, get ready and settle in. Back in the late 1970s, my parents purchased an old farmhouse that was built in 1880 in a town called South Courtright, New York. The house sat on 7 acres of beautiful valley in the middle of the Catskill Mountains. The farmhouse was in disrepair when they purchased it, but over the years they fixed it up into a very comfortable weekend and summer retreat from the urban bustle of the New York City area where we lived. The trip took 3.5 to 4 hours every Friday night, but my sister and I didn't mind it. One night, after we arrived at about 9 p.m., my sister and I sat at the kitchen table eating sandwiches for dinner while my parents had cocktails in the living room. The kitchen was at the rear of the house, and the windows faced a drop-off in the property which ran down to a clear running stream. As I was eating my dinner, I was gazing out the window. It was a dark, overcast, and moonless October night. I turned briefly to look at my sister, and as I turned my head back to the window, which was about 12 feet from where I was sitting, illuminated from the light spilling out of the kitchen, was a huge, ape-like face staring back at me. This thing that I could see clearly had a broad face with no discernible neck and shoulders that spread out beyond the 3-foot wide window. The brow of this creature was heavy, and I do not recall any expression on its face. Though I wouldn't know till much later, it was clearly and most obviously a Bigfoot. But what was different from any description that I've heard before about a Bigfoot was that the hair of this creature was orange, not black or brown. I immediately yelled and motioned to the window. My sister turned and saw the creature as well. We both yelled for my parents, but when they got there, the creature was gone. My father took a flashlight and went outside to look for it or maybe some tracks, but the ground was too hard due to a cold autumn that year. What we did realize, however, was that the creature would have to be over 9 feet tall for its face to be visible through the window at the kitchen, since the basement level was exposed on the backside as the farmhouse was built into a hill. My parents never believed my sister and I, especially since we said the color of the beast was orange. But about 2 weeks later, we read a local paper in which a farmer said he spotted a big hairy creature breaking into his hen house and stealing chickens. He said the color of the creature's hair was orange. Honestly, I hope nobody has ever experienced anything like this, but I haven't had anybody to talk to about the event, so I figured this could be a chance to get it off my chest and see if there are similar experiences. Maybe it'll help. I've had 2 car accidents in my life. The first was May 23, 2003, and I was hit by a drunk driver while I was on my way to work. No serious injuries on either side, and everyone made a full recovery. The second was more severe and much more bizarre. My grandmother and I were on our way to the grocery store when it happened. About half a mile away, I could see a speeding car coming toward us, and it was quickly closing the distance. On the side of the road, there was a very low shoulder which the driver of the speeding car hit, causing him to lose control and slide into us. Everything instantly went black upon impact. When I opened my eyes, I was somewhere else. I was able to stand and look around at my surroundings. I was alone and standing in the middle of a vast black desert. Black sand and black sky. Just endless nothing for as far as I could see. There was no sound, because I remember trying to scream with everything I had, but there was nothing but pure silence, no matter how hard I tried. I picked a direction and took off walking. That's the last I remember before waking up inside the truck. When I awoke, the truck was partially underwater. When the car hit us, it knocked our truck upside down into the creek, and the car had landed on top of us. I was trapped and I could see that my grandmother was dead. At the time, I had no memory of the accident, just that I was in a horrific situation that looked extremely grim. Once again, I mustered all the strength that I could and screamed. This time, there was a loud bellowing noise. I had no idea where I was, what had happened, if anyone knew, and no clue if help was coming or not. I continued to scream until I could hear voices of people who had heard me and were coming to help. In the end, I was the sole survivor of the crash. It happened on May 23, 2005, exactly 2 years to the day after the previous accident, and the day after my grandmother's birthday. The amnesia faded, and all the memories came flooding back to me the next day, everything in full detail. To this day, all of those memories relentlessly haunt me. Was the Black Desert a dream? If so, it was a nightmare with the worst timing on Earth. Was it a hallucination? Perhaps. I did have a pretty severe head injury, so I suppose that could be possible. That leaves my final, scariest question. Was it real? Did I temporarily go somewhere else? I don't know. This is partly to get the full story of what transpired that day off my chest. Very few people have heard all the details. The other reason is to just see if anyone else has ever experienced anything even close to this. I'm not expecting to find any answers by sharing this story, just a desire to know if there are others. That was sent to me by YouTube handle Last of the Wilds. That was a terribly tragic event. Maybe someone listening can help validate this strange experience. I sure hope Last of the Wilds gets some answers. I do know this. If it were me, I'd find a way to stay home every May 23rd. My best friend and I planned a week-long hunting trip every year, starting back in 1984. We started hunting together in high school, and it was what we both enjoyed. We were bow hunters because it was more sporting and the state management areas were quiet, which presented more of an opportunity to see deer. A national forest in the Panhandle was our preferred place to hunt, and we found we had the place to ourselves every year during bow season. We would use the same hunt camp every year, located in the middle of a 500,000+ acre state management area. We hunted there every year until 1990, when we decided to try Texas for several years and then return to the Florida Panhandle in 1994. We had several experiences throughout the years hunting there. I was able to explain them all away until our 1995 trip. The 95 hunting season started out normal, and we were enjoying our vacation, but noticed the deer were not as active as they usually were. We had the forest to ourselves, so we always put our tree stands close to the hunt camp. The open area around the camp allowed for great visibility, and the deer were usually abundant. A few days in, we were enjoying a morning hunt on a nice clear day, and the forest was extremely quiet. The sun had been up for a couple of hours when I saw 2 deer run into the clearing about 250 yards from my stand. They were headed toward my friend's stand, which was about 100 yards to my left. Chasing the deer was what looked to be a man dressed in black. The man was keeping up with the deer, which was the first thing I found odd. Another strange thing was the way he seemed to seamlessly switch between running and crawling. It seemed that he would crawl when the brush was thick, and then run in the clear areas. They went by my friend first, and then towards me. As they got closer to me, I got a good downward view at what I thought was a man. He was crawling toward me when I noticed he wasn't wearing clothes, but was covered with hair. He was about 6.5 feet tall and built like a basketball player with extra long arms. The hair was dark brown and longer on the back of his head and arms. He was crawling, not relying on his hands much, but instead using them to separate the bushes while he snaked his way forward. I noticed his long arms didn't seem to taper down, but seemed to be the same diameter the entire length. I couldn't see its face from my view, but noticed his head seemed to be swiveled up on his shoulders in an odd way. The crawling motion reminded me of a lizard or snake, the way the hips swayed. It was so strange I thought I was discovering a new species and wanted a better look at the face of this creature. I remembered debating in my mind about making a noise in order to get it to stop and look my way. My fear was that if it turned my way, it would forget about the deer and come after me instead. When it was about 20 to 25 yards from me, I let out a gasp. The creature stopped, stood, and turned toward me. He saw me in my tree stand almost instantly, and we stared at each other for what seemed like a minute. My adrenaline was pumping, and I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest. It felt like I was looking at his face through a tunnel. I remember that the face wasn't human, which increased the tunnel vision effect. His eyes were large and almond-shaped, with very little to no whites visible. The eye color was dark brown. He opened his mouth and gave me a gnarling look. His teeth were square, larger than normal, and a few were broken. The mouth was huge, and the look he gave me was a mix of anger and surprise. He definitely didn't expect to see a human up a tree, and he didn't seem happy to see me. I was relieved when he turned his attention back to the deer and continued his chase in the thick tree line. Just a minute or so after that, I heard what sounded like the deer meeting their fate. It took several minutes for my heart and breathing to return to normal. The reprieve didn't last long, as I had my second look at this creature about 30 minutes later. He walked out about 80 yards from me staring at him from the same tree line he had disappeared from earlier. He stood there looking at me for a few minutes, but it felt like much longer. At that distance, I couldn't make out any details, just a dark figure standing upright. He eventually slipped back into the trees. When I made my way back to camp, I asked my friend if he saw the man in black, and he said yes. I told my friend about the dirty look the man gave me. He told me that he didn't want to talk about it. When I asked him why he didn't want to talk about it, he got aggravated and again said he didn't want to talk about it. I knew my friend well enough to know he was serious, so we dropped the subject. I didn't sleep much that night because I couldn't get the being's face out of my head. At about 3 a.m., I heard bipedal footsteps around the camp and our tent. Our only weapons were our bows and hunting knives that we stored in the tent at night. I lay there trying to come up with a defense plan. Fortunately, the intruder left as fast as he arrived. I mentioned what I heard to my friend the next morning, and he didn't reply. I wonder now if he heard the same thing, but decided not to talk about it. I kept telling myself that it was just a man dressed in black. I was in denial and shock, which caused several weeks of nightmares. I had nobody to talk to about the encounter, so I kept it to myself. I had to tell myself over and over again that it was just a man, so I could finally sleep again. I spent a total of 8 bow seasons at this location and had many other experiences that I managed to put in the back of my mind. I didn't think much of my experience until I started checking into the Sasquatch subject on YouTube about 7 years ago. I now believe that these were all Sasquatch related. My family thinks that I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. I feel fortunate that I had these experiences, but I don't believe I would ever hunt the Panhandle again. Life is crazy enough without adding more cryptid encounters to the list. Wow, very well written account sent in by Kevin from Central Florida. Also want to thank Last of the Wilds for sending in that account. It was just fantastic. I want to thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed those, give them a like and a share. And if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.